YouTube. Been a good minute. But wanted to come on, do a live, test out this mic system I bought off Temu. By the way, I'd like to say the affiliate programs these companies put out there is a lot of crap. What do you guys think of my seasonal mug here? I thought that was really cool. Now, not really done much of a dedicated live on YouTube. If you go back in some of my past videos, you'll learn why. But I felt like coming on here this morning at the top of the wee hour of the morning of 4:01 a.m. in the morning, on a Saturday, October 18th. And I came on here because I was inspired by a comment that was put on one of my posts of a video. And why I say I was inspired, because the person that made the comment is somebody that I have followed their channel, been a fan of, a friend of, although I've never met this person in person, but I have sent him one of my art pieces that was one of my very first attempts at trying to paint the ocean. And even though I wasn't quite as proud of that piece, but I was proud of the fact that I attempted it, that I did it. And I know I've progressed a little bit more since then. Maybe not on seascapes and stuff like that, because it's kind of hard to try to paint something that you've never physically seen with your own physical being. It takes on a whole nother retrospect or aspect of that nature. But this individual, when I very first discovered their channel, they was running it under the name Gray Bailey. Then after so many years, they turned around and they was running it under their actual name, George Bruno. But I like to call him Mr. George Bruno out of respect. And then now he changed the title of his channel to Listen My Son. And he put a comment, like anytime that man comments on anything, I don't care what it is I do. Anytime that man puts a comment on any of my videos whatsoever, to me, it's like meeting a celebrity that I've been a fan of, but it's much more than that. I apologize for my talking and everything, and like if I sound nasally, I apologize. I'm getting over a cold. I've been sick here lately. Been really sick. Not like sick, like deathly sick, but I've been sick enough. I know that. And the change of weather. And if you know anything about Indiana weather, well, hey, you know what I mean. Or even down in old Kentucky. But anyhow, no, just anytime this man has ever put a comment on anything I've ever done, it really means the world to me, because when I first discovered his channel, I was reaching a point from being the first steps of taking my first steps of into manhood and going through some troubles and tribulations in my life, and just kind of, I never really had that much guidance from a male figure in my life. And I mean, I had my adopted dad who was a friend that became more like a father figure. And then I had a stepdad, but the age gap, and I should say generational gap, because my stepdad was an old man. And when I say old man, I mean my mom married a senior citizen. I'm not joking. And he was a good person, although sometimes I often wondered if I was just more tolerated than anything. But I do remember the year he died. It was 2005, the same year I graduated. And I'm not going to lie, I was not the best stepson in the world. Probably wasn't the best human being in the world in some ways. But, I was a loving, kind person. I know that. Just a little off, in some ways. And I remember I remember asking God to let that man live long enough to see me do something great in my life. Well, either in some ways God either had a sense of humor or what was in that man's heart was what he lived long enough to see me do. And maybe that was the greatest thing in that man's eyes to see me done, because the last great thing that man seen me do was make it through high school. He saw me graduate, as which that was a shock to, sorry, once again, I'm sorry. Nasal stuff, sinus stuff. But it was a shock to me that the man lived long enough to see me graduate. I think I was maybe 9 or 10 when that man was in my life or came into my life. And he was already, like I said, a senior citizen at that point in time, but he was a highly functioning senior citizen because he was an old farmer. But that point in my life, I didn't think I'd done much of anything that made that man happy. I figured I was just tolerated because he loved my mama. And so, I thought maybe, I was just tolerated. And I know he had called me a lot of things. And remember one time he made fun of me because I couldn't read cursive writing or during a Christmas event. Going to read off packages, names off the packages, and pass them out to people. And he kind of made fun of me and said, "Can't you read?" And thing of it is I had trouble reading cursive. I knew enough about cursive that I could depict certain letters, but that was about it. I remember that very, very vividly. But anyways, in the year 2005, I graduated. That man was on the sidelines, and I looked over, and I only seen that man cry twice in my life. At that point, first time I saw him cry was when my oldest stepbrother passed away, and I remember seeing him bawling like a baby. And then the day I graduated, I remember looking over at the sidelines, and that man was bawling like a baby. And when you go got your diploma, you got a picture with whoever this one old dude was, and then he wore a funny hat just like you was wearing a funny hat. Just his funny hat looked even more goofier. And then you walked over to the line where your parents were, and shook shook their hands and showed them your diploma or whatever, and then you went back and sat down in your seat in line with your class. And I remember he literally took my hand because he had a stroke at this point in time and he was pretty much wheelchair bound. He took my hand and both of his hands wrapped around my hand, and he said, "I never thought I'd ever live to see the day. I never thought I'd ever see you graduate high school. I didn't even think you'd ever make it through high school." He said, "This is the greatest day ever," pretty much, in his own words. I about cried. But if I would have known then what I found out in July of 2005, matter of fact, found out a week after he passed away, actually, because my step brothers and sisters, they didn't care for my mama. Of course, they all were pretty much older than my mama, but they didn't like my mama. And I just assumed we were just, me and my sister, well, I mean, beyond a shadow of doubt, we was tolerated. That was about it. And I turned around and found out a week after he had passed away that he passed away. They didn't tell nobody. But it really sunk into me after I heard that. It really sunk into me because I do remember I called him up, believe it or not, the beginning of that month, and I told him I loved him and told him that I was really glad that he got to see me graduate and everything, and you know, and it sunk in to me all those years. I prayed to God that I'd do something in that man's eyes that he would just be happy about, be proud of me for doing something that was truly great, see me do something really great with my life. And he passed away a month or two after I graduated high school in the same year of 2005. Now, I'm not good at the math, but I'm trying to count on two hands here. I have to use my toes, but 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2015. No, I done lost track. But here it is, 2025, and that was 2005. So you do the math. But other than that, I never really had much of a male figure role model really in my life. Now, for my stepdad, I learned how to do gardening, learned how to cut grass, learned how to mend fencing, learned enough about livestock to know that I don't want to mess with livestock. Now, I rather plant stuff and watch stuff grow, personally, on that aspect. I don't mind doing logical gardening. I'm not a flower type of guy, per se, other than maybe roses. But outside of that, I would rather plant medicines, natural medicines, and foods that are going to sustain through winter times and hard times. And I owe that man that. I owe that man that and owe and pay him homage to that because without that knowledge that he taught me, I wouldn't have a clue. I would be stupid about it as the day I was born. So I owe that man that. And that man's name was Robert Monroe Talley, spelled Tally. Tally. Funny thing is about my stepbrother and sisters, they kept it so hush hush about him dying and funeral that I don't know if he's buried in a Worthington cemetery in Indiana or if they buried him somewhere else where we couldn't visit the grave, because I tried my hardest to look for the man's grave. I found his first wife's grave, but I couldn't find his. I remember a long time ago he had supposed to have had a plot next to her, but and then there's here there. But then after that, many years down the road, trying to escape through life, I made a friend of an old man that pretty much became an adopted dad. His name was Jerry McKinnon. He was an old fart, an old cowboy, a Vietnam vet, and also a veteran of the Cuban crisis. I can't remember the abbreviations for it, but he served in the Navy. And at the time, he was what they called a frogman or underwater demolition. I think now they call it the Navy SEALs. Could be wrong about that, but it's best to my knowledge, my memory. And he kind of taught me a little bit more than what my stepdad did in some ways. Now, I never really ever, and to this day, I am not mechanically inclined, and I always wish that when I was a kid, I wouldn't care if it would have been a woman, but somebody that knew something about mechanics. I wish they would have got a hold of me when I was younger and taught me how to work on stuff. I wish someone that knew something about electricity and wiring and construction and all that stuff. I wish someone would have got a hold of me when I was younger and taught me this stuff. But what I did learn from these guys, these men, it was tools. From my adopted dad, I learned a little bit about women, learned a little bit about trying to have common sense, and learned just a little bit on how to actually try to tame my wild ways from, as he called it, an old cowboy's mistakes. Well, when he passed away from cancer, and well, during the time when he had cancer and a lot of things were going on, and in between all that time and before that time, I in and out of a lot of relationships, like any young man probably would be. Had about two of them before I ever knew my wife existed that I thought was going to be forever. Love stricken, or more like confused lust for love, like any dumb young man would. Learn from my mistakes on that one. Took a long time though, but I learned. Took a lot of hard knocks. What it done, a lot of hard knocks. But during that time period, I was getting into growing my mustache, and I wanted to, get into, putting my curls in and everything. And I also got into the interest of pipe smoking. Although at that point in time, I didn't own a pipe, but I was just learning, trying to find as much information as I possibly could, because I remember I once tried to smoke a cob pipe, and It was a horrible experience. Didn't know what I was doing, and so that's what started me on this journey. And that's when I came across George Bruno. At that time, was calling his channel Gray Bailey, and the man had a big old grandfather beard, pretty much. And the guy was talking about, how to start smoking a pipe, the do's and don'ts, what you should start out with. And then I started, getting into wanting to style my mustache and, facial hair and all that junk. And then I ended up coming across his channel again, and I just started subscribing to the channel. And I have been a follower probably, oh, I couldn't tell you, early, mid to late 2000s, I have been a follower of that channel. But I feel like from watching his channel and his videos, I felt like the information he put out there, freely given, he never had, like in any of his videos, I do know, and I don't know if he still has it or not, but he did have a page of scripture where he offered more one-on-one coaching, kind of, and things of that nature and extra things. And I don't know if he's still doing that or not, but I say I learned more wisdom, or maybe gained another part of wisdom that I was lacking in my life from listening to this man. And I gained such a great respect for that man. I'd almost probably be super nervous if I ever met him in real life, face to face. I think the only thing that probably come close to talking up would be probably second best to seeing Jesus. Now, a lot of people might say, well, that's far fetched, that's putting a man right. No, I'm just saying that it would be almost maybe a step below meeting Jesus. And why I say that is because the information and the free advice that man was putting out there online, by talking about his own experiences, by talking about his own life events that's happened, and encouraging, young men to be the best version of themselves, and how to make themselves be better, and how to better yourself, and how to be unstuck. And, I took up a lot of that advice. I absorbed that advice like a sponge. Now, granted, I'm dyslexic and I have lots of troubles. Boy, do I have lots of troubles. You just don't believe sometimes the things I struggle with. You know, from reading traffic signs to trying to slow my mind down enough to try to write a paragraph, let alone one word to make a sentence. I mean, the dyslexic mind is a constant race, a race against your own self. And, you know, when I was taking in the advice that man was given, I found that I was bettering myself and still working on myself. You never, and I tell you what, I don't care what anyone tells you out there in the world. If someone tells you there's a point in time where you ain't got to worry about working on yourself, then they ain't seen the real picture, because every day you should try to better yourself a little bit more than you were the day before. And you never stop learning. The day these things stop is the day that the good Lord calls you home. Now, with that also being said, I ain't no preacher, and I'm probably the furthest and most unworthy person of all to be preaching the word and everything else. With that being said. But until the good Lord calls you home, you never stop working on you. You never stop bettering yourself. And don't be afraid to stretch your neck out every now and then and try something you've never done before. And don't let other people say, oh, you can't do that, or you'll never do that, or you'll never achieve that. Those are people holding you back. People like that, you just need to drop or dissociate yourself from them because they are going to hold you back. That or they just never had anybody to inspire them. But, anyways, old George Bruno made a comment on one of my videos, and I told you all this stuff to lead up to this comment so that you get an idea on what it truly means to me when this man comments on any of my videos or in any of the lives I've ever done when the man popped in and let me know that, he was watching me, you know, but he had seen the painting that I'd done recently. So I forgot. I stuck it out in the kitchen. Because I got a blank canvas ready to go, and I'm gonna maybe start on this project as soon as I get done with this, and I'll be going live on TikTok. Um, I up and do live paintings on TikTok. Once in a blue moon, I'll probably do some paintings here on YouTube. But I got a much bigger. When I say bigger, I mean I got a bigger following of people that follow me and my painting on TikTok. I got like more followers on TikTok than I ever imagined could get on YouTube. Although I do say before YouTube pulled that stunt a couple years back, screwing over the small creator like me with being able to do mobile lives, um, I say my channel on YouTube almost was about to break loose. But thanks to YouTube during that time period being stupid and screwing over the small creator, that drove a lot of people like me to places like TikTok, Clapper, whatever other media there was out there at the time that maybe still is. I even was attempting Facebook Lives, which Facebook Live sucks personally. If you ask me, I think it sucks really bad. That's just my opinion. Um, anyhow, he saw my new painting I done that I called Frankenstein's Castle and gave me some words of encouragement and said I'm getting better all the time and asked me when I'm going to start selling my work. And I have sold my work. Matter of fact, before I was even good, remotely good like I am now, I up and I went to some friends of mine, same friends that got me started. Because when I say started, I mean these were friends that every now and then they would hear me say, well, one of these days I'm going to paint that sky, or one of these days I think I'd like to paint this scenery, or something like this scenery, or just, do the Bob Ross thing, and they just got tired of me saying it. So they literally gifted me some starter canvases that probably were no bigger than this canvas, some starter paints, some acrylic, some oil, and said, here's the paints. Now quit talking about it and do it. Y'all remember me talking about you know, people that encourage you to do things. Those are the people that want to see you succeed. Those are the people that rejoice in your triumphs and lift you up during your failures. These friends are those type of friends. And they turn around and they gifted me those first set of paints and set of brushes and canvases, and they help give me the butt kicking I needed to get started. And about a year after that, I was needing some money for bus fare, and it's cold, and I just didn't want to walk in the cold. I'd done enough walking when I was working at the Walmart down in Alexandria, Kentucky, and I lived two and a no, 3.5 miles away, up the road from Alexandria in Cold Springs, Kentucky. And then that, where I lived at, geologically put me 2.5 miles from NKU, up the road from me. Well, I asked him, I said, hey, could you loan me some money for bus fare? I said, and I'll get you back when I can. I said, I'm good for it. I said, I just don't want to walk in the cold no more. And they looked at me and they said, you know what? Instead of borrowing money, how about we just pay you a commission for a painting? And I said, well, how much would you be willing to pay for a painting? And they said, well, how's $18 sound? I said, well, $18 is nice, but I said, that ain't going to help me get my bus fare for the week. And they said, well, how much is the bus fare? And I can't remember how the math worked, but I just know that I'd done like 4 or 5 paintings at $18 a piece. So you do the math. So, 18 times 4 or 5. And anyways, I sold my first paintings. Bam, right out of the gate, like that. And they wasn't the greatest, but I poured my heart and my soul into it. And at that time, I didn't have liquid white. I didn't have liquid clear. I didn't have gesso or nothing. What I was doing to give me a slick canvas, I would go get glossy white or glossy black, because when it dried, it left a slick surface on the canvas. Well, that slick surface allowed me to be able to do some blending and stuff of that nature that I wasn't able to do with just the dry paint. And that's how I done like all that. Like if you go back in my catalog of my videos here on YouTube when I first started painting, and everything that looked like it was really awesomely blended together and everything else, I actually really had to work at that and take and do a lot of corner cutting because I couldn't afford a lot of that stuff at the time neither. And sometimes I still can't. But I was literally working hard at trying not to work hard at all, painting wise. Matter of fact, I did not have that type of stuff, like the liquid clear, the liquid white, or the gesso until I met my wife. But that's a whole nother ballpark. But getting back to my painting though, uh, that's how those are the friends that helped me get started, gave me the kick in the butt I needed, then turned around later, paid me commission for 3 to 5 paint. I think it was 5 paintings I done, 4 or 5 paintings I done. So I made my first bit of money, and then I sold 3 months ago. I sold two of my paintings at $20 a piece. And to me, that made me so happy because to some $20 a piece, people say, well, you're low balling yourself. You got the money in the canvas, you got the money in the paints and everything else. Well, you want to know something? I am somebody that is really a nobody trying to be somebody. And if someone's going to pay me $20 for my work, hey, $20 is $20 because you know what I've done with that $20? Let me tell you what I've done on that $20. That is what actually in that week ended up being $40. Matter of fact, I'll show you the fruits of my labor from this. Just give me a second. I'm sitting right over here. Everybody in the background's hearing this noise like, what'd he do? I want to show you what the fruits of that labor got me. First of all, it got me this brush cleaner system, which it's not the greatest, but it's the best that I could find. It got me this. It got me all this. All these tools. And it got me this professional brush kit that I ordered. So, and then also, and I was just with one of the 20s I made. Just one of the 20s I made. Now, granted, I'm going to say that stuff was ordered off of Temu. It's all a Temu buy there. But you know what? I still had out of that 120 that I spent, all I spent with that, I still probably had about $6-7 left out of that 20. And then you know what I done with the other 20? Or I guess 20 what I had left over. But the other one, I bought some canvases. I put gas in my vehicle and bought my son, who I took with me to collect the money for one of the paintings, I bought him a drink from the gas station. All off selling those two paintings for $20. All that I just showed you is a manifestation of my hard work and my effort that I put into it. And if I can do that with all the challenges I face, I mean, granted, my challenges is not as great as others, but anybody can do it. Anybody can do anything they want to do. If you put your mind to it, put your heart into it, you can do anything. But I just want to say out there and give a shout out to Mr. George Bruno to say thank you, because you not only inspired me doing this live this morning, but inspired me to want to work on this next painting that I am going to try to do. And it's going to go along with Frankenstein's Castle. If anybody's a big fan of the Universal Monsters. Now, I cannot remember how in the original Mary Shelley's writings of Frankenstein, as which Mary Shelley was a woman who was a writer who also married a writer, or maybe he was a poet, I can't remember, way back 200-300 years ago. I don't know, give or take. Don't quote me. You do the history for yourself. But anyways, the Universal Frankenstein movies all were very much based off of her writings, just the same as The uh, Bela Lugosi Dracula was all based off of the silent film The Fusa, or however you pronounce it. And then later on, um, the Bela Lugosi film of Dracula, I think, is what inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula. Or maybe I could be wrong. I could be backwards in all this too. So don't quote me. Do your own research. But I like the Universal monsters. I do. Now, Creature from the Black Lagoon. I can take him or leave him. The Invisible Man. I can take him or leave him. But the Wolfman, the Mummy, as which the Mummy is kind of borderline on that too for me too as well. And but the Wolfman, Frankenstein, and Dracula though those are my top three picks. OGs, for horror film or monster horror films, and I'm inspired by that gothic art. I love that gothic art. I've learned that there's a lot of gothic artists out there from back in the day, and I couldn't tell you none of their names, to be honest with you. And I hate to say that, but I love that gothic art. I like the painting of Dante's Inferno. I think that's a really interesting painting. Um, I like some of the creepy paintings, but I also like beautiful sceneries, like the scenery you see me painting up here, or see that I painted in here. And that's actually going to be a painting I'm going to be revisiting because I painted it back in July and I was happy with it. But then the longer it sat drying, and like I ain't done my two-step process to it, so I still have the grain of the canvas to access on it. But I'm going to revisit it and I'm going to put a nice little cabin in it or something like that because it just seemed too bare to me. And that being a big canvas, I figured cover that canvas with as much detail as I possibly can. So I'm going to go back, revisit it, and do that. And that's the wonderful thing I love about oil painting. And I'm sure people that do acrylic painting can do the same thing. Now, I'm going to tell you what, if you can make acrylic paint work the same way as I can make oil paint work for me, in my mind, Zai, you're a master painter because like with acrylic paint, you literally are watching paint dry before you can make a move, before you can blend it. Like you're totally constantly working, blending um, acrylic paint and layer after layer after layer. Paint a layer, dry, let it dry completely. Paint a layer, let it dry. I mean, if you acrylic painters out there, you painters that do acrylic, you know, my hat's off to you because I find that to be very, very, very wonderful skill that I have never mastered. I thought about later on. Now, I will say, I love what Bill Alexander and Bob Ross brought to the world of painting. And I am taken up with that and I'm inspired by that. And then there's a guy I recently discovered. His name was Brandon Thomas. He's from Kentucky. I just recently discovered him when I was trying to learn. I was trying to look up to see how to paint realistical looking cabins. Like almost like how Thomas Kincaid painted those cottages and stuff. They looked like something out of a freaking fairy tale. I wanted to try to paint a cabin like that. And so I even like looked up, how to paint realistic cabins, and it actually kind of took me down the Thomas Kincaid rabbit hole kind of. But I ran across him, and he also does the wet style painting, but he also uh, I think he showed a little bit of some mixed media that he also worked with. And then I kind of eventually would like to do some of the type of mixed media styling that Thomas Kincaid sort of kind of done. Um, but I want to do it with cabins. I want to do it with cabins. Paint realistical looking 18th century style cabins. Now I like the Bob Ross method and the way Bill Alexander done buildings and stuff, but I want to advance into trying to paint like what you know better looking cabins, like 18th century style looking cabins, all the way up to luxurious modern day beautiful cabins. Is my dream is to have a cabin one day, like to retire to a cabin and then to do and keep doing what I'm doing art wise. Now, I will say I've been also bummed out a little bit, and it's going to sound pretty stupid, but on me and my wife's wedding anniversary in July, right on the same day, 22nd of July, Ozzy passed away. I've never met Ozzy a day in my life. Never. Never met him. But his music was all inspiring to me, and also kept me from making a permanent solution for a temporary problem. God's honest truth. If I was standing before Jesus Christ right now, I would tell Jesus Christ that if he asked me. But I wouldn't have to tell him that because Christ already knows. And then this month, those of us that were original lineup Kiss fans, and also I'm an original fan of Eric Carr, too. I think he was the best replacement drummer ever, personally. I don't think anybody will ever top Peter Criss or Eric Carr as far as drummers for Kiss, personally. But that's just my personal opinion. Um, Zinger, he does a good job for what he does. But as far as in the makeup is concerned, that's where my stands out on it. But we lost Ace Frehley this month, and that really sucks. And like I told a buddy of mine, who's next? Alice Cooper, Robert Plant, you know. But then again, I said, the three surviving members of Black Sabbath, you know, and this guy, he turned around, he's like, dude, he said, you got to realize that he said these guys were doing this stuff when our mom and dads were in their young heyday, and he said it was a miracle and a blessing that certain particular people like us in our generation got to know their music. He said, so really, honestly, any one of them could go. And he said it'd be just right too. He said because they're at that age, and I'm just like, in my mind, I'm thinking I'm too young to be seeing this stuff. Too young to be seeing this stuff. I know there was like a generation, even in my mom's generation, to where they saw Jimi Hendrix, or well, actually Elvis come and go, Jimi Hendrix come and go, um, Eric Clapton, I think, not Eric Clapton, Stevie Ray Vaughan, I think, or is he still living? I can't remember now. Gee golly. But you know, there was like a time period where it's like all these stars just, kicked the bucket for whatever reason. So everybody knows you're hearing my alarm. This is actually the original time I was going to get up and start doing this and get motivated to start doing this. I just automatically got motivated and started doing it before that even went off. Crazy, huh? Might as well turn off the rest of these alarms because I'm already ready and ribbon and going for the day. Got a big day today. Well, it's been a rough up and down week, and in between the whole house being sick, got the newborn, she's still sick, and a lot of things going on, and yeah. But anyways, I just want to say, uh, George Bruno, if you run across this, I just want to say that you was the inspiration for me doing this. You're the drive for why I'm going to try to attempt up there, and your compliment and your encouragement means a lot. And I see we got someone or that did pop in there. Well, they came and they gone. Oh well, such is life. But anyways, well, I was getting back about Mary Shelley's and the Universal monsters before I went on another long trail. Back to other subject. Um, in the movie, the Universal movie of Frankenstein, the final climax of the movie where the monster and Dr. Frankenstein, they have it out, and the final battle was like took place in that windmill tower. What I want to do up there on the canvas is paint my depiction of that scene in the movie the way I see it in my head. And I've never done a windmill ever. And I don't want it to look like the country bunking windmills, but like the European windmills that were grinding wheat, stuff of that nature. That's the type of windmill that is what you saw in the movie. If you think about it, hundreds of years ago, they had the technology, the bright minds back then to know how to harness energy, free energy like that to feed a mass industrial demand for wheat, for flour, and all sorts of other things. Did you know that I also recently learned from researching how to draw wind or paint windmills? I ran across a short documentary, and I don't know if it was in Ireland, Scotland, or another European country, but the accent seemed kind of Irish or Scottish. I couldn't figure it out. But there is still, to this day, one of those windmills that still grinds up pigments for oil paints. And this particular place was known and still is known to this day for making the wonderful aquamarine blue that, when it was first invented and discovered, was said to have been much more valuable than gold because it was just that rare. Now, I can't remember what it is they grind up to make aquamarine blue, but I now learn why aquamarine blue in large quantities by itself out of a set, why it's expensive and why it's so vibrant. And I can understand why then, in some ways, why it was possibly much more valuable than gold, because it was such a beautiful, vibrant, but expensive pigment back in the day. And I'm talking, like, I can't remember what century it was that the aquamarine blue came around, but you know, it's been around for a long time, but it was very, very, and everything. It means a lot. It really does. And I hope you run across this. And yeah. Anyways, I'm going to be going live on TikTok to do a painting. This painting right up here. I don't know when I'm going to do it. But I'm probably going to start on it this morning at some point. And I just like to say thank you to everybody. Till next time.